Good morning, everyone. Welcome to EDPNC's first session of a series of 6 master classes on mastering global expansion. Today's title is Strategies for Success. So Zach Selch, who is leading these series, is an international sales practitioner, leader, mentor, and author. And each of the sessions will be 90 minutes. He has decades of hands-on sales experience across the globe. He's very familiar with the intricacies of various global markets, and he's going to walk us through some critical planning strategies and steps to launch international business successfully. I'm going to take a quick moment to educate anyone on the call that might not be familiar with EDPNC's international trade team, but we are a public-private partnership that's under contract with the North Carolina Department of Commerce to conduct economic growth activities on behalf of the state of North Carolina. And we also have private sector investors. The international trade team here at EDPNC is 100% focused on helping North Carolina companies to expand and succeed in global markets. And this series that we're bringing to you today is a new endeavor. You will be quite entertained by Zach. He is full of energy and vibrant. And after the session is completed, we will have some follow-up material and interactions available to you. That being said, I will go ahead and hand it over to Zach, and Zach can let you know his preference for interaction through the format as he goes through this. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Melissa. So I'm just going to jump into it. I work with a lot of different clients, and I'm going to talk about just an example of one of them. Very well-educated group of people, a company between them. Everybody has a PhD, everybody has an MBA. And when we started talking, I was looking at the markets they're in, and this particular company has 3 use cases for their products. They basically work with, you could say, surgeries that take place outside of hospitals, births that take place outside of hospitals, and then surgeries that take place on the military battlefield, right? And so they're looking at different markets to go into. And the most exciting one, the one that everybody's interested in, is battlefields. But when you take a look at that, well, there really are very, very few surgeries that happen on battlefields around the world over the course of the year. There are exercises, that kind of thing. But the number of that really is something like 50 or so. So that's like 50 use cases around the world for their product for this one, one use case. And then when you take a look at office surgeries that take place outside of hospitals, well, about half the markets in the world actually forbid those. There's no way to bill for them, and in some cases they're illegal. But when you take a look at maternity births outside of hospitals, those numbers are just huge, okay? So when you're thinking about what is the right market to be focused on, they were basically looking at 2 different markets that weren't really very good markets from the numbers perspective. They were very cool to think about, but they weren't very good in terms of the numbers. And here are some really, really smart people with really, really good experience. And we had to sort of push and say, okay, let's push our market focus into something that is huge. And by huge, I mean millions and millions. If you just take a look at a handful of markets, Pakistan, India, Nigeria, Congo, a few other places, you're talking about millions of potential uses for their product, as opposed to hundreds or dozens of uses in other markets, okay? And the reason I'm jumping into that and starting with a story is I want you to understand the value that happens when you focus on the right markets, okay? Over the course of these 6 sessions, we are going to talk about 3 main ways that you can grow internationally. And the first way is to grow your total addressable market, okay? So if you go from selling only in the US into selling into other countries, by growing your total addressable market, you're going to grow the amount you sell. And really, if the way I like to put it, now obviously we're not in a laboratory, things are different, but if absolutely nothing else changes, if you increase your total addressable market and you keep everything else the same, you increase your total addressable market by 20%, your sales are going to go up by 20%. You increase your total addressable market by 100%, your sales are going to go up 100%. And let's remember that about 94% of the global economy is outside of the United States. So the more we can get into the right markets, the more potential we have for large growth. And we've all heard about the 20-80 rule. Let's think about this for a second in terms of how this impacts global sales growth, okay? So essentially, let's do sort of a mathematical model. I know this isn't terribly realistic, but let's say there are 100 markets in the world, okay? And 20 of them are each worth about 4% of the total market. And 80 of them are each worth about 0.25, right? So the 80 weak markets are equal to about 20% of the total market, and the 20 strong markets are equal to about 80% of the total market. What that means is you could be selling in 8 weak markets, and they will be equal to 1 good market. And very often what we find is I will talk to people who say, yeah, I'm selling in this market, and this market, and this market, but they're selling in multiple weak markets, and they aren't selling in any of the good markets. And sometimes now that averaging out, saying 4% and 0.25%, that isn't terribly realistic. But sometimes you might have a situation where there are 5 markets in the world that between them represent half the total market in the world for your product. And then all the other markets are pretty much not relevant. And I find people very often getting into that trap. Very often I'll talk to people who they go to a trade show, they talk to people, and they get sucked into selling in a small, essentially irrelevant market to their particular product. Or sometimes they end up in a very what might be an attractive market from a tourism perspective. They want to go to France for vacation. So they end up selling in a market, even though their product isn't really relevant for that market. If we can figure out what markets are the best for you, right, that is a huge starting point for our growth. So what we're going to talk about today for most of the session is that identification of the right markets and the planning of the first steps you're going to take for global expansion. And I know a lot of you are veterans, a lot of you have been doing this for a while, so I hope this doesn't bore you, but we'll get through this relatively quickly. I'm also going to say before I jump into the next things that at the end of this, we will get you a little bit of information in a document format, which sort of helps you figure this stuff out. And on top of that, what we're going to do is we are going to make available to you. If you go to my website, you'll find a lot. My website is globalsalesmentor.com. You'll find a lot of material which will help you figure this stuff out. There's a little game that will help you identify the right markets, a game that will help you figure out who the right distributor profile is for you, those type of things. So there's a lot of different things you can play with on my website, get free resources. Everybody in North Carolina has access to a course that I've developed. It's 40 hours of video that digs down really, really in depth into all of these subjects. You just have to talk to Melissa or Cheryl and get access to that course. And I'll also say that anybody who's on this call today, if you want to reach out to me and spend half an hour or an hour with me and go over this material, I'll be happy to give you a free coaching session and just talk on that. It's really, really important to us that we see actual practical results coming out of these sessions so that, we know people will keep coming back. And there will be, like Melissa mentioned, 5 additional sessions. This one is just the first one that talks about the first steps of planning. This is the least favorite part of these courses that I always have to do, but here's the deal. I am going to have to sort of introduce myself and talk about myself for about 2 minutes, because I'm going to tell you a lot of stuff that's going to sound counterintuitive, and very often I'm going to tell you stuff that sounds like it is really different from what everybody else is telling you. So if you don't have any idea who I am, you're not going to listen to me, and we're not going to achieve anything. So I'm going to do I'm going to do 2 minutes of bragging here that I'm not terribly happy about, but I find that it's really important. I've been selling for 35 years in 135 countries. I've closed about $1 billion worth of purchase orders, and I have recruited and onboarded at this point somewhere around 1,400 distributors. I lost count exactly at about 1,000. But what I want to say from that is I am a true sales practitioner. I was a sales manager, regional sales manager, director, and a VP together for about 35 years. I only started this consulting and advising about 4 years ago. I've written books, I've lectured in different places, but essentially I am somebody who sells. And the reason I say that is because some of the stuff that I'm going to tell you is going to be directly opposed to what you might have heard from other people. And the reason I feel so confident in the way I say it is because I know it works. It's worked for me. I've driven 100% growth dozens of times. I've driven 1,000% growth 4 times. And once I drove 4,000% growth. Just a couple of things people have said about me. I had a guy who worked for me who is a very successful CEO now. He told his kids, what Zach taught me allowed me to buy the house I raised my family in and to send my kids to university. Another guy said, Zach's unorthodox ideas helped me drive my sales from a few million to almost 100 million. And another guy said, everybody teaches you the rules. Zach is the only guy who teaches you how to win. And the only reason I mention this is I'd like you to understand that I have an idea of what I'm talking about here. Okay, so now back to work. What we're going to try and achieve in these 6 sessions, working for the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, is we would like you to understand, to be selling in all the correct markets, to have engaged, competent, and accountable distributors, and have systems and a cadence of accountability in place. We're going to talk mostly today about the markets, and we're going to talk a little bit about the setting in place the first elements of the cadence of accountability. This is one of my business heroes. I don't know if any of you know Takiro Kobayashi. He reinvented the concept of eating hot dogs. He was the guy who broke the world record. When he started training to be a competitive eater, he had never actually eaten a real hot dog. When he competed, he broke the record. He ate twice as many hot dogs as anybody else had ever done it, essentially by looking at the rules and totally reinventing the system of how people ate them. You might want to read about him. This is David Brainsworth. He is the British bicycle coach, and he did something totally different. He takes every little thing that the team does, from the color of their socks to the soap they use, to how they grease their chains, to everything. And he looks at it and he figures out if he can improve it. And the reason I like these 2 guys is together, they're looking at, totally changing everything we do, and then not changing things drastically, but changing things one at a time. And I think if we do these things together, we can achieve fantastic sales growth. And that's sort of what we're along here on the ride for. Now, let's jump into talking specifically about finding the right market. Okay. Very often we do this sort of randomly with a lottery system. And by that, I mean, we don't pull names of countries out of a little bingo ball thing. But we go to a trade show, we put up a sign, say distributors wanted, or we wait for people to reach out to us. And if you think about this, there is almost no situation in our business where we do something as randomly as accept distributors. And when we accept a distributor, we're choosing to work in that market, and we only have so much bandwidth. So if we decide that we're going to work in 20 markets because people from those markets reached out to us, and we haven't really figured out if those are good markets for us or not, we are allowing somebody else to control our destiny and our strategy. And that's the thing that I really do my best to try and avoid. Okay, so that's what we're going to try and fix today, or at least address today. Whoops. Sorry. Shoot. Okay, so first of all, what we're going to do is we are going to look at why, who, when, and what. We're going to look at a few questions, and these questions are going to help us. These questions are going to help us get a feel for how we choose the right market. Now, what do I mean by why? Why do people buy our products? And very often, when I ask people this, they'll say, well, we make the best ones, right? We have the best steel, we have the best machinery, we have the best design. But let's take it a different step, a little bit farther, okay? Let's understand exactly why they buy our product. Not necessarily because of the quality, but because of the functionality. What exactly does it do? And I'll give you an example of one of the early products I dealt with. A guy designed a fantastic ventilator that ran, a medical ventilator, ran on about 6 hours of battery. And the reason he invented it, he had an idea in his mind that it was going to be used in ambulances for transportation. And what turned out was that ambulances have a really good electrical system. Nobody needs a ventilator with a battery, 6-hour battery for an ambulance. But the people who ended up wanting that ventilator were people in countries where the electrical system was unstable. So we sold a lot of ventilators in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia to places where they really wanted to have access to a ventilator that would work off of a battery when they couldn't trust the electricity. Okay, so by understanding that, we were really able to pivot and find the right markets. Okay, who buys our products? And I was talking to a client just recently, a few weeks ago. Again, most of my clients are very, very successful, very well educated. I don't want to make it sound like they were, they didn't really understand things, but they've been doing this for a while. And I said, well, tell me who buys. And they said, well, hospitals. I said, okay, no, who in the hospital makes the decision? And I had to really walk them through this, and they hadn't thought it through very well. And I said, look, there is a specific clinician in the hospital who will buy your product. Now, if we know who that clinician is and we know why he's buying it, what the problem is, okay, that will really help us understand. So for instance, And I'll use a couple more examples from the medical business, but typically different countries either deal with what I like to call lifestyle diseases. Okay. They're getting a lot of diabetes, they're getting a lot of cancers, those type of things, because people are eating too much or drinking too much or that kind of thing. Or on the other side, they're dealing with infectious diseases or sometimes malnutrition. They're poorer countries. So one thing to understand is, are the people dealing with infectious diseases, or are they dealing with diabetes and cancer and that kind of thing? Um, if it's a factory, right, who's buying it? Well, let's say this is people are buying my device to put into a machine that makes shoes. Okay. So, well, where are the biggest shoe manufacturing countries around the world? I was talking to somebody a while back who dealt with shrimp farming. Okay. So finding that, there are about 10 countries in the world where there's a massive amount of shrimp farming, and most of the world there's no shrimp farming. So it's pretty easy to figure that out. But once we really have to look down carefully at who exactly is making this decision, because if we understand why people buy it, we understand who is buying it, we can figure out the markets that we want to be selling into. When do people buy it? A while back, I had a boss who introduced me. This actually goes back almost 25 years. I had a boss. He introduced me to the concept of a compelling event in business, and I really like this, especially for using right here when I'm trying to figure out when people buy my product. I'm trying to identify the right markets. I like to say there are two types of compelling events. One is a macro compelling event. What do I mean by a macro compelling event? That is a governmental type of thing that impacts everybody. Now, we're dealing with tariffs right now. That is a macro compelling event that will change the way people buy things for a while. One of the most interesting compelling events that I witnessed myself was when the the government of India told people to wear helmets. And I'm sorry, is there a problem with the volume? Can somebody say, Melissa?
Yeah, there's a couple of people that asked for the volume to be turned up, so I was just checking on that.
Okay, is it something that I can control, or is it something that's controlled some other way?
Well, we'll just do a touch base. Hey, Dr. Fan Lu and Lisa, can you hear a little bit better now?
Yeah, it's a little better now. Yes.
It's a little better now. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks, Zach.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem. I just looked at the chat and saw it. So okay. Yeah, if anybody has a problem or anything like that, please let me know. So a while back, I was in India, and the Indian government suddenly decided that everybody who drove a motorcycle needed to wear a helmet, and they set a date, and suddenly the Indian market needed 50 million or so helmets right away, and everybody needed them. So that was a compelling event that drove a business event that was very big and very important, and impacted a lot of people very quickly. Now, let's think about what a macro compelling event is. That's sort of when maybe people change something about their life that will impact their buying something. And the example I like to use is many years ago, the first time I went to Istanbul. When you went from the airport to downtown, you would see that there were thousands or hundreds of thousands of essentially mud huts that people lived in Istanbul. They were made out of mud bricks, and people lived like that. And in that same area now, between the airport and the downtown, there are beautiful high-rise apartment buildings. The quality of life has dramatically improved, meaning that just in Istanbul, millions and millions of people have gone from the lower economic classes to the middle class. And they all need all of the trappings that go along with middle class. And there are products we sell that correlate with the entry into middle class. A lot of medical products, by the way, you could say they go from when people are poor and just want basic medical service to being rich or comfortable, and now they want to be comfortable when they encounter their doctor. Okay. But there are a lot of other products that go from, when people are entering the middle class, food products, other minor luxuries, that kind of thing. So one thing to look at when we are examining new markets is there some kind of a trigger, some kind of a compelling event that will indicate to us when people will start buying our products. And what do you want to achieve? Okay. And this is something that I think is sort of interesting and people don't necessarily think about. What will success look like for you as a company? Because if what you're looking for is revenue and revenue alone, you might go into some specific markets. If you're looking at growing your global footprint so that you will have better long-term revenue, maybe you're going to go into different markets. If you are looking to increase the value of your company, maybe you're going to go into specific markets that will impact that. Okay. And there are other things that are less well thought of. Okay. But for instance, one of the first jobs I had, a company hired me because their biggest competitor, which was an Australian company, was poking around in the United States, and they were scared that this Australian company was going to get market share in the United States. So what they decided was that if we attacked this company in Australia, it would make that company pull out of the United States because they'd have to focus on protecting their home market. Okay, so success for that company was to take market share from their competitor in its home market. All of these are very relevant and very, they're certainly could be goals that you would want to have, and they're certainly legitimate goals, right? But you have to decide what you want out of this before you start deciding on which markets you go into. Okay, so these are some of the things that you want to be thinking about before you start choosing markets. Okay, and now let's talk a little bit more about how you choose these markets. Okay. Very often people are going into markets because somebody has reached out to them. I really hate doing that. And I've found over my career that I'm constantly dealing with fixing that. And people will get very excited. They'll say, well, they reached out to us. There obviously is a market. Well, what you know when somebody reaches out to you is that there is one person in that market who wants to buy your product. You don't necessarily know that there is a large market for your product. You don't know that there's a sustainable market for your product. What you really know right now is there's one person who wants to buy. And what could be the problem with this? Why am I concerned about this? Well, imagine a situation where you're actively supporting an installed base in 5 countries that each one has less than half of 1% of the world market, right? It takes up your time and effort. Maybe you have to do service with them. You have to support your product because you don't necessarily want people to be unhappy with your products. And this is taking away from the time you could be spending in the relevant, important markets. And this is the problem as far as I'm concerned. So I'll tell another story. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference, and somebody from the audience asked. There were three diplomats on stage talking about expanding into different countries, and this woman from the audience asked, and she said, "Hey, I have money to go into one Middle Eastern market. This was, I have a medical product. What market should I go into?" And this diplomat on stage said, we have this new agreement with Morocco, and I would recommend that if you're going into one market, you should go into Morocco, because it'll be easier for you to repatriate your money with lower taxes. There was an economic explanation, and I raised my hand and I said, "Look, the medical device market in Saudi Arabia for American products is $2 billion. The medical device market in Morocco is $200 million. That is a tenfold difference. Are you telling me that you believe that this treaty is worth 1,000% difference in market size?" And he said, "Oh no, if you're looking to make money, I would go into Saudi Arabia." And I thought for a second, I didn't say anything else, but I thought, okay, then why would you say, of course we're looking to make money? We are business people. And what I'd like to say by this is be very careful about the information you get from different people, right? What is their interest and what are they trying to do? When I was a kid, I played saxophone very, very badly. And I came home one day and I said to my mother, my teacher said that if I had a better saxophone, um, I'd play better, and she can sell me $1,000 saxophone. And my mother said, "Well, how does she make her money?" I said, "Well, she does lessons." She goes, "Yep, those lessons are, $7 a piece." And she sells saxophones. So do you think maybe she wants to sell you the saxophone to make money? And I learned this lesson very, very young. And my point is, keep an eye on why people are advising you to go into markets. If somebody, for instance, makes their living translating websites into Japanese, and they tell you that Japan is a great market for you, think about that very carefully. One thing that is good, excuse me, about organizations, or one of the many things that is good about organizations, like the Economic Partnership for North Carolina, is their interest is in helping you expand revenue and create jobs, no matter where you're going into, right? So find advisors and sources of information that what they care about is what you care about, and that they're not going to try and guide you into the wrong markets. There are way too many people out there who focus in specific markets who will try and guide you into the wrong markets. Okay. I'm going to give you two more examples from my personal history of how finding the right market really drove success in different places that I worked. So a long time ago, I sold a device that was sold to clinicians, typically in emergency rooms and ICUs, and it was used to monitor the functioning of people's breathing, but it wasn't the gold standard. It was very accurate, more difficult to use. Okay, so it was more accurate than the gold standard. It was more difficult to use than the gold standard. And the founder, the inventor, really wanted to replace the gold standard, which never happened. Okay, that's the short story. But the product and the company, we sold a lot of product. And what we did was we looked at it and we said, okay, we know that there are people who care about these numbers. They want to know the quality of the chemical reaction of the blood to breathing. the ones that have bought a pulse oximeter, which was the gold standard, the people who bought a pulse oximeter a year later seem to be really, really ready to buy our product, right? They won't buy it first. They won't buy our product first, but they will buy it second. And the prime companies that sold pulse oximeters in the world were publicly traded companies. So we bought a couple of shares of stock, we got their reports, and now we knew exactly where they were selling. And we just focused on the countries that last year they sold a lot of pulse oximeters to. And we sold tens of millions of dollars worth of our product just by following that one tactic. So there are those are just some ideas of why you want to go into these markets. I'm going to tell you a couple of other things about markets that I like to keep in mind when I'm doing this. And again, this comes from a lot of experience. Okay. Very often people say, okay, let's pick out the one best market to go into. We'll go into it for a year or two. We'll see how it goes, and then we'll decide. I always suggest to people to diversify their markets and never put all of their eggs in one basket. Okay. Why? Because things happen. Best example for me was in 2016, 2015, I was selling about 70% of what I was selling to countries whose economies were based on oil extraction. Okay. Highest margin, lowest cost of sale, everything went beautifully. 2016, the price of oil dropped something like 70%. And luckily, it dropped in January. So I had time to react and change. Now, the year before, my CEO had said to me, we really should focus all of our sales on these oil producing countries because they're economically so much better than the other markets. And I said to him, I do not want to put all my eggs in one basket. I want to continue, even if the margin is lower, it's safer this way. And what I was able to do was really shift and work really hard and hit the same number we had hit last year, maybe even a little bit growth, even though we lost all of the best markets for that year and a little bit of the following year because of oil prices. So my lesson here, which I would highly recommend, is take a look, figure out what the best markets are for you. And then also take a look at their economic structure, or I like to call them extraction markets. These are markets that are based on oil and other mining, right? Chile, Argentina are big extraction markets, plus all, of course, the oil producing markets. Mexico, Brazil are included in those, okay? But then there are industrial markets. For instance, Mexico, which I just mentioned, is a very good diverse market. They have a lot of manufacturing, a lot of extraction, a lot of agriculture, right? Nothing is going to sink. Not one specific thing is going to sink the Mexican market, right? So if you can find a handful of extraction markets, a handful of industrial markets, a handful of agricultural markets, you're really making yourself safer. If you can spread out between the Middle East, South America, Asia, Africa, Europe, if possible, depending on what your product is, the more diverse your markets are, the better. So I'm not saying go in first year to 40 markets, but go in the first year maybe to 12 markets and spread them out, because otherwise, if a single event, a bad weather event, a tsunami, an earthquake, something that impacts oil prices, could kill your entire international marketing structure, because your CEO could say, hey, you tried, it didn't work. Let's give it up. Okay. So I think that's really important to remember. And then I'll mention one other thing in terms of planning markets. I like to say here are my absolute top markets, but I also have secondary and tertiary markets. Why would I do that after just talking so long about the importance of being in the right markets. Well, let's say Peru is the very best market for me in South America, but the other markets aren't quite that good. So if I'm only flying into South America to go to Peru, I'm spending all this money on servicing a single market. Now, is Colombia an okay market? Is Chile an okay market? Brazil? Because then I can go in, I can spend a week in Latin America for just a little bit more than it would have cost for me just to go to Peru. And that way I can visit 5 markets on that trip. Okay. And for me, that is a really effective way to get to a lot of markets. So I always suggest that we do that, right? That we try and add a few secondary and tertiary markets to the countries we're working in. So that is pretty much what we're going to talk about today in terms of identifying markets, and then we're going to go on. Now, again, we're a relatively small group today. We're 20 people. I think everybody looks like they're quite professional and they have experience. Anybody who wants to reach out to me, first of all, if you go onto my, like I said, if you go onto my webpage, there is actually a free resource that says I will, find the 5 best markets to go into. You can play with that. But also feel free to reach out to me on either LinkedIn or through email or through my webpage or through Cheryl and Melissa. And I'm happy to chat with you if you have any questions about the initial markets. Now, let's talk a little bit about what else we do in the beginning as we are building stuff up. And one of the things that I like to think about, I don't know how many of you were fans of the old caper films. But I love the 60s caper films. And the first thing that the boss always did in the caper film was he pulled together his team. And pulling together a good team of people as you grow is really important. And having an idea about how to do this before you grow is pretty important. You don't necessarily want to say to your boss, "Oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed. I can't handle this. I have to hire somebody next month." And then you're stressed, you're in a real hurry to do it. You should be thinking about this ahead of time, what that team looks like. And typically, to do really, really good work, you probably want a regional person for about every 8 to 20 distributors. And that number will be disputed by just about everybody. And this is one of those things that I won't necessarily say that I am definitely right and everybody else is wrong. There are things that I'm willing to argue about. But this one, it depends how much work you're putting into each sale. Okay. And we'll talk about that at a future session about building up the sales process map and building up the ideal distributor profile. But you have to decide, will the regional sales manager be doing demos? Will she sitting into many sales meetings, or will they be in a purely management role? Okay. In my world, the best way that I've done this, and I've worked with some really fantastic teams. What I like to do is have the regional sales manager in a purely management role. Their job is to manage the distributors. I would do centralized training for the distributor salespeople, which means basically that I would do it or somebody from headquarters would do it. The regional managers would manage, and then the distributors would do all the selling, pretty much from start to finish, all the heavy lifting. Now, if you do that, a regional manager can easily handle 20 good distributors and get the most out of them, which means that if you're working with 60 distributors around the world, you're looking for about 3 regional managers. So you're thinking about that. The other thing that I like to suggest to people, and all of my clients do this, is I always suggest to have what I call an anchor on the team. And that is somebody who never travels, who's always at headquarters and is available essentially 24/7 for emergencies, keeps track of where everybody is traveling to that week, but also is available to walk papers around the office in case something comes up and needs to be taken care of, needs a signature, that kind of thing. Now, in today's world, that might be less and less important, but it is still pretty important. So I like to say, a really good team selling about $20 million is probably going to be a VP or director who's at the office, an anchor who's at the office, and then maybe 3 regional sales managers around the world managing, 60 more or less distributors. That's a really, really good structure for a team. Okay. I'm going to say something else about the team, right? It is very common for American manufacturing factories to want to hire people they like into the regional sales manager positions. And there's a great quote by a famous business philosopher, and it says something like, weak companies hire to achieve a task, strong companies hire to fit company culture. Okay, and that is a great quote, and it sounds wonderful, but I find it doesn't fit reality very much. Okay, if your task at hand right now is to sell internationally, it doesn't matter if the sales guy fits company culture. It matters if he can sell, right? And I can virtually guarantee you that the person you hire who knows how to sell well in Egypt, Indonesia, Nigeria, places like that, probably is not going to be somebody your CEO wants to play golf with, right? I pretty much guarantee that. What you want is to find the right person who can sell, whether or not the people in the company really like that person. And I know that sounds a little bit harsh, but I've been through this over and over and over again through the years. I had this one guy work for me who was a phenomenal sales guy. And honestly, he has a very sweet heart. But my CFO on a weekly basis told me how I had to fire this guy constantly. You have to fire this guy. He doesn't fit in. He doesn't fit in. I was constantly talking to this guy about what about being politically correct or doing the right things around the office. One time I literally had to write this note that said, these are 20 things that will get you fired at headquarters, because I wanted him to understand that he couldn't flirt with the secretaries and he couldn't yell at people in the cafeteria and stuff like that. So I really had to work hard to get him to fit in. On the other hand, he was bringing in millions and millions of dollars in revenue that pretty much nobody else could have done, right? So you have to understand that balance. And in my mind, what has to win is you need the right person to sell in those territories. It's really really important to get that right person. And you have to think about finding people and how do you go about finding people. Well, we'll cover that in a later course, but in terms of the planning stages, right? You have to think about this team. You have to think, well, what do I need people to do, right? And how is that person going to be part of the sales process? And how am I going to find that person? Okay. The backbone of the whole organization is the distributors. And I will spend most of my time in future sessions talking about finding distributors, onboarding distributors, training, coaching, all of that. Right now, we're just going to talk about the planning stage of thinking about the distributors, okay? But for me, and I don't know if there's anybody out here, I'm happy if somebody wants to say something, but typically what I always say is if you're under $500 million, your focus should be on channel sales in terms of international sales. I know there are companies that go direct depending on the product, all that. I never feel like going direct is a good use of money for a company that's under about $500 million. Now, and I'm going to use right now sort of the generic term of distributors. You might be using agents, you might be using some other type of sales partnerships, but distributors will give you those boots on the ground, which allow you to sell more, right? And if you have a bad distributor, you're really in trouble. If you have a good distributor, you're doing really well. I like to use the term engaged, competent, and accountable distributors with the correct level of bandwidth, okay? So we are going to figure out what we're looking for in a distributor. We'll talk about that when we talk about the sales, the ideal distributor profile as we search for a distributor. But since we're talking about countries, we should also be figuring out what the required bandwidth is to be selling in these countries, okay? And I would say that 99% of the people I talk to don't think about this. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's think about how many potential customers there are in a market, okay? And let's look at a couple of very, very different things. So let's say we're talking, and these are some things I've had experience with. Let's say we're saying, okay, how many large-scale shrimp production companies are there in a specific market? And that may be whoops, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there. So we might say, well, there are only 20 potential customers in that market. Or we could say, well, I'm trying to sell to 4,000 hospitals in Saudi Arabia. So now I have this giant number that I'm trying to sell to. Okay. And then we think, okay, well, what's the sales process? Will this involve 2 visits? Will this involve 12 visits? Can I plan out how many times, how many hours of work? And this is something that I do for every time I recruit a distributor, and every time I plan out a go-to-market plan for a company, right? I'm going to figure out for every target market that is relevant, not every market in the world. I'm not going to do this 180 times, but sometimes I'll do this for 60 different countries. I'll say, okay, for every client, every potential prospect in this market, I need to give 20 minutes of time, okay? Or for every purchase order I get, it's going to take me 16 hours of work. And this is what I need to get. This is the total number of hours. A salesperson is essentially 2,000 hours a year. Okay, so I'm going to figure out, do I require from this market a full-time equivalent? Do I require 6 full-time equivalents? Do I require 2 full-time equivalents? What is going to give me the proper level of coverage for this market? And when I have that, I'm actually going to plan that before I do anything else. Before I reach out to distributors, this is going to be part of my planning process. Okay. I like to build up a sales process map also as part of my planning process. Okay. And I have a mirror here because for me, a sales process map mirrors the customer's purchasing journey. People talk about a customer's purchasing journey. I would like to understand my customer's purchasing journey. For the most part, people like to say, well, every market has a different purchasing journey. Yeah, but you can understand it. And this is my system. I don't expect everybody to adapt my system, but every system has a similar skeleton, and you start off with a skeleton. So I like to say there are four big building blocks to a sales process: building trust, finding customers, helping customers internalize, we can help solve their problems, and delivery. And typically the selling part is that building trust and helping customers internalize, we can help solve their problems. And then the question is, who does what? Okay, and what do I mean by that? Well, typically we're going to want the distributor, the channel partner, to find the customers and to have trust with them. Okay. If you think about, like, say, selling in Nigeria, if you're flying into Nigeria to meet with a customer, it is going to be virtually impossible to get them to trust you in a economic way, right? Unless you want to spend a few weeks in Lagos and build up a relationship, you're probably not going to build trust with that customer, but your distributor will. So if you have a distributor who has trust with the customers that you want to be selling to in that market, they're doing their job. They're finding the customers and they have that trust in place. Now, can you get them to essentially present the product, help the customers internalize that your product solves their problem? Or is that something that you have to fly somebody in to do a demo, right? You have to decide how this is done. And let me put it this way. I work with customers, clients of mine who they have, for whatever reason, a demo that is so difficult to do that they don't have their distributors do it, right? The distributors essentially find the customers, have a relationship and have trust with the customers. They will do discovery, and then they will set up a demo, and somebody will either fly in or they will have the customer fly to a reference site so they can see an existing system and work, or they'll do demos at a trade show, or they'll do something like that. Okay. In other cases, the distributor can do everything. You have to figure out, depending on your product and your market, what exactly you want the distributor to do. And again, I said we're going to deal with the ideal distributor profile next course, next session. And we're going to really dig down into that because that's how we're going to find our distributors. But in terms of your planning, in terms of the team members, in terms of the resources you're going to need, you really need to understand this from the very beginning, early on. Okay. And once we've figured this out, we're going to build a sales process map. Okay. And I know I don't know, how you guys think about this. Some people see this and they really think it looks very academic. And some people say, oh yeah, of course, I've been doing this my whole life, right? So it really depends. I can tell you that this is a very, very valuable and powerful tool. And take a look at this and basically say, well, the different colors represent different segments: finding the prospects, establishing trust, helping them internalize that we can solve their problem, and then the delivery. And the different shapes represent different people in the process. Is it headquarters? Is it the regional sales manager? Is it the distributor? Okay. And these things taken together help us understand who does what and what the right regional sales manager looks like, what resources you need in headquarters, in terms of training, in terms of coaching. Later on, we're going to talk about things like building a playbook. We're going to talk about things like how you train people and how you coach people. But before you really start, you should have an idea in your mind what you need. So, for instance, if it is your anticipation that your distributor is going to do a demo, you have to figure out how are you going to train him? Are you going to do regional trainings face to face where you rent a hotel suite for 3 days? Are you going to build up an online video playbook to train him? Okay. And those two will probably cost the same in the first year, but over the long run, the video playbook is going to be cheaper. On the other hand, you'll have a cost of less face-to-face interaction, right? So you have to be thinking about all of these things and how they will impact you before you start, in my opinion, right? And getting this planning in to begin with is I think always better. Okay. Now, I like to think of a lot of times people will sign up a distributor and that's it, or they think that's it. And from my perspective, it's all about the coaching. And you have to understand that there will be, if you're hiring 12 distributors in the first year, you have to earmark time to train them, okay, and coach them. And that coaching could be, hours per week, or it could be minutes per week. There are tools that you can set up to use for this. Like I've mentioned the online playbooks. I always work with my clients to build up online playbooks. There are fantastic tools that will deliver training and coaching through a cell phone or an iPad or a computer, where you can keep track of everything that everybody is doing, and you can coach them as needed, right? So what you have to keep in mind is your job isn't to identify markets, find distributors, hire the distributors, and then wait for checks to come in. A big part of the job of the company is going to also be to coach, and then also to put in place what I call a cadence of accountability, managing them, okay? Are you going to have weekly meetings with the distributors? Is the regional sales manager going to have weekly meetings with the distributors? Or is it going to be the director or VP having monthly or quarterly meetings? Typically, I've done this where the regional sales manager has weekly quick updates on the phone. The VP of sales has quarterly or biannual meetings face to face, either in the market or at a trade show. And then I would also say bring in my boss, either the senior VP of sales or the CEO, to sit in once a year and meet everybody. And that's more just to give everybody a feeling. But you should think about this cadence of accountability, how you want to keep everybody on track before you start, okay? Because if you can set this up early on, you're going to get the best results. Why do I show pyramids here? Because a pyramid is a very robust, reproducible, functional structure, and our systems should be robust, functional, reproducible, and easy to describe, right? You can make, they have made pyramids all over the world in all different materials and all different sizes. You want your systems to be simple and clear and robust, but also effective, like a pyramid. But you want systems in place. Sometimes people like to, they'll make some type of jokes about shooting from the hip, or from, or winging it or whatever. We want to generate a lot of revenue. We want to keep growing. We want to achieve our corporate goals. We want to be good at forecasting, all of these things. And to do these things, we need systems in place. And over the next over the next 6 months, over the different sessions, we're going to talk a lot about all the different aspects of the tools we're going to use and the systems we're going to use and the methodologies we're going to use. Now, let's talk a little bit about the tools that we want to have in place as we set things up. Okay, we want a pitch to the distributors. Okay, this is going to be different from a pitch to end users. Okay, distributors typically are interested in three things. They're interested in, can I make money? Is it easy to work with this company? And can I trust this company not to screw me over? So what you want is a pitch that you might be very, very familiar with the market, but your distributor might not quantify that market very well, right? Might not understand how valuable your product is. So you want them to understand that there is a lot of money that they can make. You want them to understand that you have actually thought through that it will be easy to work with you, right? And you know your company. Maybe everybody in America knows your company. Maybe you're a household name, but it is entirely possible that nobody in the target market, the distributor, has no idea who you are. So what you want is to be able to show that person, that distributor, why they can trust you. And that's a big thing. So what you want in your pitch is, this is the market size, this is how you can make money from this. This is why it's going to be really easy to work with me. And this is why you can trust me. Now, what I've found is there are some really, really good tools to make a video pitch in about 2 to 3 minutes for almost nothing, for $50 to $100. There are people on Fiverr who will do it for you. There are a lot of different ways to make a wonderful pitch video. And why do I like pitch videos? Well, when we talk about finding distributors, and we want to do this fast. And what we're going to talk about next session is how to build up a world-class sales organization in about 180 days. And I think that's faster than anybody thinks is possible. But one of the things I like to do is say, okay, I'm going to identify I'm going to identify the markets. I'm going to identify the potential distributors, which we're going to talk about next time. And then I'm going to hit them with a fast pitch. And a pitch video means that I can get their interest and set up a meeting much quicker than I would possibly otherwise. So a pitch, one way or another, a pitch is a good thing to have. Okay. You want to have an agreement in place before you start talking to people, because once you start talking to people, they're going to say, well, send me an agreement. And you don't want to be rushed on that. I do not give advice about agreements except for the part about putting in what you expect from the distributors from a sales perspective. Okay, so you have to get it in. But if you reach out to me, I'll send you a draft agreement, because I have on my website you can pull off a draft agreement, and from my course you can pull off a draft agreement. So if you need help, you can. But I insist that you have a lawyer look over it, right? Because I am not a lawyer. But you want to make sure you have an agreement, and you don't want to say to people, oh, we really want to work with you. Our lawyer will get back to us in the next month to 6 weeks, and then we'll get back to you. You want to keep everything going fast. To that extent, I also recommend everybody to have a letter of intent ready. Here's what I do. And again, we'll talk more about, onboarding distributors next time. But when I talk to a distributor and I decide that I want to work with them, that day I will give them a letter of intent. And the letter of intent basically says, I want to work with you in this market. I make X. You're expected to do Y, which are sales activities. It is our anticipation to get an agreement signed within the next number of days, 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. Until then, I won't be talking to another distributor. And any sales that you bring in during that time, no matter what happens, you will get credited for and make money off of. Okay. And what I find is if you don't give a distributor a letter of intent, they will wait until the agreement is signed to do anything. If you do give them a letter of intent, they will be selling like that because they want to start selling. Now, if it's going to take you 2 years to get to, say, $1.2 million in that market, that's $100,000 a month. Okay, if you waste 2 months waiting for your lawyer to get that paperwork signed, you just lost $200,000 because you did not have an LOI. So think about it that way. And like I said, playbook. We will cover playbooks later on as we talk in future sessions. I made my first playbook 10 or 12. I made my first video playbook 10 or 12 years ago. So the first time I made a playbook, it was like two old school phone books on top of each other. It took like a year to put together. And then every time something changed, it was weeks of work to try and fix it and change it and so on. My first video playbook I made 10 years ago, and it cost me about $50,000 to $75,000 to make. And the next one I made after that cost me just under 25K to make. Now making them is a matter of a few $1,000s. The value of having a video playbook online means as you need to change things, they're really easy to change. You just change it in the playbook and it's online. You make one change and now everything is changed. But it also means that every single salesperson around the world selling your product can find your material exactly the way you want them to use it on their phone, which means you can say to somebody, hey, you are going into a meeting tomorrow. I would like you to review chapter 8 of the playbook before you go into that meeting. And you can tell if they did or not. Training videos, either as part of the playbook or not, they are a hugely valuable tool right now in terms of tools to sell. Okay. And funnel, depending on how you are working with your international distributors and your team, either you're using a CRM or you're using some other type of a funnel, but you should have a system in place that you want to use that describes the different components of the sales process and who is expected to do them and what the cadence is of them and what you believe the conversion rate should be for each section of the sales process. You should have that written before you sign your first distributor. So you have everything set up and you have ideas. Okay. This will help you manage your distributors correctly. Okay. So we're down to the last little bit of what I would call setup and prep for starting out. Let's talk a little bit about payment because we want to get paid, right? And what I like to tell people about international sales is if you're in Ohio and you are selling a big piece of machinery from Cleveland to Cincinnati, somebody basically can give you a credit card number, they can write you a check, they can make an easy bank transfer, you load the piece of machinery on a truck or they send their own truck. The whole thing is very simple. Now, let's say you are based in Charlotte, you are selling something in Chiang Mai, Thailand. How do you get paid? How does it get shipped? How does it get to where it's going? At what point does that stop being yours and start being the customer's? At what point is your insurance relevant, and at what point is their insurance relevant? So you need to understand all of this, and you need to have decided on all of this before you start working. I will tell you, I've worked for 14 or 15 companies as an employee, and I've worked with dozens of companies as clients. Everybody starts off not ready for this. Or everybody when I come into the picture, as far as I'm concerned, starts off not ready for this. I've had talks with companies that have been selling internationally for 30 years, and I'll talk to the payment manager, and he'll say, Zach, I've been doing this for 30 years. I think I know everything I have to know, blah, blah, blah. And they are not prepared for mistakes that happen. And everybody gets burned by this. Now, if you get burned, if your typical margin is, 30%, and you get burned by one deal out of 12, right? You're really, that's a big painful burn in terms of your annual profit, right? You can lose a chunk of your annual profit because of one burn, because you were not prepared correctly for payments. Now, it used to be a lot easier because you'd have a lot more banks, and you could have a banker that you could talk to. But I'm sure even Bank of America or Citibank or any of the big banks, you can probably call and say, hey, I would like to talk to a banker and understand this international payment stuff. I always talk to people and I say, look, it is our intention to grow internationally. We're going to be selling a lot more. And I would like to talk to somebody. Now, I'm also going to say that I bet if you talk to the people at the the Economic Partnership of North Carolina, there are people there who can help walk you through this. I am sure there's an XM Bank guy or person based in North Carolina who'll talk to you, right? And they'll give you really good advice. I don't work with XM Bank a lot, but probably on average once a year I'll do a deal with them. If you're not familiar with XM Bank, it's the federal bank that secures and insures. I don't know, bank might be the wrong word. It's a federal organization that secures and insures international payments to make sure that you get paid. And their people are great. They're knowledgeable. I would make sure before one of your first steps, find your local XM banker, talk to them, and reach out, talk to your bank, get a good feel for making sure that you have a system in place to guarantee that you are going to get paid. Incoterms. If you do not know what Incoterms are, you should learn. If you do, you should check, because they change periodically, and they changed a couple of years ago again. One thing I'll say is in 2025, right now, the question is, do you need to know all of them? Because very often we're just not using most of them, but you should know the 2 to 3 to 4 that you're going to use on a regular basis. What exactly is an Incoterm? If you don't know, that's the terminology we use that is extremely specific about how goods are shipped and money is received, and when the goods change hands, who is responsible. They define every element of the physical interaction of the trade, so that you know that if you use a specific term, when you get paid, when the customer gets the product delivered, and who is responsible for the insurance, the shipping, etc., at what stage in the journey between you and your customer. You should know this. You can buy a book about this on Amazon for a couple of bucks. I am pretty sure, well, I can tell you right now there's a half-hour lecture on Incoterms in the course on my website, which you can access through North Carolina. But it's good to know. You don't need to know these as well as a forwarder knows them, but it is really important to know these and know them well. You should also talk to a shipper, okay? I always have a relationship with a good forwarder. Obviously, you might not be using sea freight, although you guys are, on the sea, you could use sea freight, but you work with a good forwarder. You get to know somebody, you call up and say, I want to talk to an account executive. You can start off with FedEx or somebody like that. They will assign you an account executive who'll talk to you. But you might want to work with one of the bigger shipping companies, depending on the size of the products that you ship. But I'd like to have a relationship with a shipper. Very often, your forwarder will do your shipping documentation for you and your payment documentation for you, depending on your relationship with them. You might want to take that in-house, but that's going to be more expensive, right? You have to have somebody trained to do that. I'd like to have somebody trained to do that, but it really depends on the size of your company if you can afford to. Most good forwarding companies will do all the paperwork needs that you have for you. So having that relationship and asking them to do it really is very helpful. So those are the things that I would say. That brings us to the end of my presentation. Exactly 10 minutes before the end of our time. So now I'm going to open up for questions or comments, or just I'll run through a short little bit where I'll say this. We have 5 more of these, I think. They will dig into depth for all the different things that you need to cover. I hope that you will join us for the next ones. If you have specific questions about what we covered today, please reach out to me. It's really easy to find me on LinkedIn, on my webpage, etc. But you can also reach out to Cheryl or to Melissa. I am a resource of the EDPNC, and I am here to help serve you. What I am trying to do is help create more jobs for North Carolina. So anyway, if anybody has any questions about what we covered today, please feel free to so Matt, that is what we're going to cover next session. That is what I wake up every morning and do, pretty much. I literally get up about 5 o'clock in the morning calling distributors all over the world for my clients. So yeah, we will be covering that next session. Okay. Any other questions?
And you can see, this is Melissa, that I put in the chat, for those of you that aren't currently looking at the chat, I put the upcoming sessions just by topic, and all of this is on EDPNC's event page currently. So if you have a little bit of time immediately following this session, you could just register for all of those so you don't miss out on putting those on your calendar. Zach, I have a quick question. When you had mentioned, kind of ideally diversifying early for a company, if a company, is working into international business sales with a very limited budget, right, which tends to be the case normally, what are your recommendations for kind of grappling with the ideal situation of diversifying heavily compared to, hey, learning with 1 to 2 markets, maybe just having the bandwidth for 1 to 2 markets? Can you dig into that a little bit now, or do you want to save it for a future session?
No, I'll dig into that, because we are talking about countries today or markets today. So it literally, it really I get almost physically scared when I think about the idea of sticking to one or two markets. And I hear this all the time. But what would happen? I mean, you almost give the answer to what you're saying. You're saying, well, we want to try this out. We'll try one or two markets and we'll see how it goes. What happens if it doesn't go well? Well, what I can tell you what's going to happen. You're going to say, "Oh boy, we're not the international markets aren't ready for us, or our product doesn't sell well in the international," and you will never try it again. One thing I'll say, and I think we've lost some of the people, so I'm sorry I'm saying it now and not earlier. Statistically speaking, about 80% of American companies will try to export and will give up, or 80% of companies that try to export give up, right? And
Right.
I firmly believe that if you can sell something in America, you can sell it internationally if you find the right market. So I hate the idea of people giving up. So for me, and really, you think about this, this might sound really far-fetched, but what happens if you say, okay, the best possible market for me is South Korea, and then there's a tsunami, and suddenly that market isn't very good, and your boss says, oh boy, Melissa, you tried, it didn't work, we should just never try and export again. Or you try and sell to Saudi Arabia and oil prices drop, or you try and sell to Brazil and the government changes. Things happen. Now, I know it's really difficult to try and diversify, but can you try three markets and can you keep them, can you do, just as an example, can you do Brazil, South Korea, and Germany, right? If those are the right markets for you. And then they're very different markets. No one event is going to kill the markets for you if you do it that way, right? And so I would always suggest that the risk is just so high, in my opinion, of putting all your eggs in one basket. So
Yep. Great. Thank you so much. Any questions? All right. Well, we've hit 11:30, so keep in mind you can email me or Cheryl Morrow, our grant manager, to request access to the video library that Zach mentioned. It is by invitation only. And so Zach's colleague will be interacting to give you access to that. And then you are welcome to reach out. Zach, can you put your email address? Did you do that yet?
I can do that. You can find me on LinkedIn, or my address is Zach. I'll put it in the chat just a second.
Yeah, put it in the chat and people can reach out. Zach will have a free kind of just like intake consulting with you. Just
Hey, Melissa,
mhm.
it's Lisa. Just some feedback. This was fantastic. I sit in on webinars all the time, and usually either I don't learn something new or it's not relevant. This was exceptionally relevant. I took so many notes. My hand is tired. I'm going to be implementing so much of this immediately. And I just want to say how much I appreciate it, and I cannot wait for the next one. Zach, I sent you a LinkedIn invite. Let's connect.
Great. I very much appreciate that, Lisa. Thanks a lot. And what I'll just say is this is probably the most boring of the subjects. It just gets
So
better
we
from
made it
here.
through.
So
Yeah.
it
Wow,
gets
what a
better from
tease.
here
That's
because
that's great marketing right there, Zach. Well done. See what you did there. See what you did.
Awesome. Thank you for the comment, Lisa. That's
but
very,
thanks for the
very
comment,
My
Lisa.
helpful.
pleasure. I got to hop out, but I can't wait to
Yeah.
see you in the next one. Have a great
Great.
day.
Have a good one. Thanks. Take care. Thanks everybody for joining.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Zach. Have a great day.
Great. All right. Thanks a lot,
Uh-huh.
everybody.
I'm
Bye-bye.
gonna I'm gonna stop the recording now.